did last session, we introduced the ECA labs, and again, this idea of how we are going to participate and how the learning takes place. Very important again to say that it's not just about these 2 hours, it's what happens before and what happens afterwards. We focused during module 1 on this idea of shifting our mindset from what's wrong to what's strong, in terms of identifying the strengths in ourselves, in our team, and within our landscape stakeholders, to have this build-up of a strengths-based culture, rather than just focusing on what's not working, what's not good. And this is an invitation. We send a one-pager handout with some ideas on how you can continue doing this in your landscape team meetings and when you approach any kind of work and interaction with your stakeholders. Then we looked at effective collaborative action methodology, from describing the components and understanding a bit more what are the different parts of the methodology and how to use it. And this idea of ECA being a way of approaching collaboration from a more holistic systems, what we call systems-based perspective. And then we applied the ECA components to our landscape level work. And we had a breakout group conversation around where to start. And post module, we had a call with the ECA ambassadors, as you know, which are the effective collaborative action representatives or sounding boards from your landscape team. And they shared a bit more insights from that module 1 session, and what worked really well, what other things we should add and think of for module 2. So this was our journey in 2 hours last time, and obviously continuing after the workshop. Just to share a quick temperature check, this is the information that we gathered from the post-module survey. So we had 8 respondents. It would be great if we can ask more people to share their insights after the session today, so that we can gather more information, just to make sure that we are considering everything for future modules. And so key takeaways that we got, what were the key takeaways for people from module 1? The importance of collaboration, focusing on strengths, great introduction to systems-based awareness. So we need to continue building that awareness. The importance of ongoing reflection. So this space was valued as a space where we can take a step back from the daily busyness and routine and kind of reflect. What I will do differently, that was the question from the post-session survey. People highlighted this idea of focusing more on strengths and challenges, shifting project mindset to building collective system awareness. And we talked about this idea of, going through work plans and deliverables and planning to, again, taking a step back and looking at the balcony view, the bigger picture of why am I doing this activity? What's my intention behind? So having that kind of movement between going into the detail of the action and looking at the balcony view, the dance floor, and what's happening more at a high level perspective. Then in the question of how much is this helping me advance my work in food and agriculture systems, it was a 4 out of 5. So that was really, really pleasant to hear that you find this space and this content useful. And people highlighted that they wanted more time for breakout groups. So we're going to have an extended breakout group today of around 20 to 30 minutes. And keep working on unpacking these ideas of system and systems change. What does that really mean? So we are going to have some time dedicated to unpacking the idea of complexity today, and we will do one idea every module to continue building this notion of how do we explain systems thinking? How do we put words to it that we can articulate for our stakeholders as well? And then reading learning materials, which we shared as part of the pre-work, and we will share after the module finishes. One of the positives from the quotes, well, we had more than 60 people joining last time, and one of the positive quotes, recognizing, reiterating the importance of understanding and practicing effective multi-stakeholder collaboration and systems change. And one thing to work on more from the different items from the survey: ask questions, share concerns, say what I thought during the session, either live or through the chat box. So if anyone feels like that you can't really ask questions, or you don't feel you have that space in these 2 hours, feel free to contact any of us from the UNDP team directly, or privately during the session, or directly afterwards, and we are more than happy to connect with you to discuss anything that might have been left unattended. So very quickly, just a touch point on going to the balcony and thinking about, from module 1 until now, how did the learning continue? What actions did you or your team take to continue the learning, if you've done so or not? And what commitment do you think is needed from you and your team to continue the learning in between sessions? As we said, this is a very important aspect of the whole experience. So it's nice for us to carve out some time today to put some attention and some intention into this. If we can hear briefly from one representative of each of the landscapes, that would be great. And I have Meg on my screen at the moment, so if I can ask you to jump in first, that would be great, and then we can pass it on to the rest of the landscape.
I'm always happy to start. So this is a good timing for today, because actually I met with the Swiss contact team in our office today, and it was very lovely to see people in person after being so remote in Paris. And one thing when we talk about learning, one thing we touched on quite a lot is how we consolidate project reporting and how to build like a real, even digital ecosystem for these multi-stakeholder forums. So when we just were talking about learning, we were also taking a wider step, is how can us as a consortium spread this as wide as far as we can to the local governments, and that was an important point of discussion today.
Thank you very much. Did you get to any insights about that you can briefly share, how to do that, or was it an open question that you need to continue working on?
It's a work in progress, but Cultiva as a software provider, we do have a few systems in place, and we're talking about how to bridge different pieces from our software applications together to make a one-stop shop dashboard to make governments aware of what the progress is on conservation. So we really bring together the synergies in our consortium for information that we can disseminate.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we're keen to hear how this progresses, because I think it's a great opportunity to share best practices across landscape teams. So thank you for that. Can we pass it on to someone from Diameter, please? And yeah, if possible, for everyone that has the connectivity, if you can put on your camera, that would be great, so that we can see each other and, as we said, make it as interactive as possible. Who would like to speak from the Diameter landscape team?
Hello, sorry, it's Intan here.
Yeah.
I think Jimmy is not yet in this meeting, but I will answer the questions on behalf of Siak Pelawan Landscape Program and Diameter Consortium. Apologize first because I'm having a flu and then a sore throat, so I'm having difficulty to speak. But yes, we are trying to like answering your questions. We are trying to involve as much as possible our team. Not only from team in Jakarta and Bogor, but also team in Riau. We also want to for all of us to to learn together. Uh, Unfortunately, we haven't discussed this internally after between the first and the second sessions, but we are planning to have the discussions about this. What have especially on the what they have learned individually for the each person. So hopefully that after the or between third and fourth sessions, then we can share to you. From for now on, we are still on the learning mode. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing. And yeah, we look forward again to hear how things progress as we move on from module to module. And yeah, it's a great opportunity, right, to take a moment to think about, okay, how are we going to build up more time and energy into learning after today's module compared to module 1 and so on. It's a progression for everyone. Thank you very much. And can we have someone from GIZ? I see Bagita that you've joined, or anyone else if that would like to step in. Thank you.
Hi. Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hi Sole. Sorry for the noise. So the rest of the team are actually wrapping up our workshop in East Kutai right now. They just finished that. So maybe I'm speaking on behalf of the whole consortium from TAL perspective. Going to your question in terms of continuous learning from the last part, actually in the preparation to today's workshop, there are already principles that we take on board as a consortium as well, and not only the ones that are facilitating the meeting, but the entire consortium have agreed on several principles that we took on. So for example, one of the clear role of engagement for the government is throughout the workshop today. It's always being positioned that they are the ones that the ones that are hosting the workshop, so including taking the role as lead facilitator and co-facilitator in the breakout meeting, where we are positioning ourselves as partners who are there to support the government, but at the end of the day, the ownership stays with them. So that's one of the principles that we took on in preparation of today's workshop, and it turns out it leads to maybe a better result compared to if we were to be the one that's leading the facilitating. So more to learn and much more structure to be agreed upon. But at least the one that the consortium agreed on is if we were to create the method together and agree on the principle together, then it will be consistently applied throughout the engagement with the district as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bagita. And also, we'll probably ask you to join in because Bagita and the TAL team have already experienced the signals of change and the CAN model, which are two things that we are introducing for the rest of the landscapes today. They've used it for a recent effective collaborative action training for a multi-stakeholder group on the NAP SBO. So also very interesting to bring in that experience and lessons learned. So thank you for joining us today. Yes, and so I think we have one more landscape to hear from. If you would like to join in, please. Who would like to share briefly? Just feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. Do we have a shy landscape today? Okay. Anyone? Last chance. Okay, so feel free to share your insights on the chat if you are not able to speak or share verbally. We'd love to hear from each landscape if possible at some point. So yeah, do raise your hand or just interrupt me and jump in if you're able to share. So yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. And again, you know, let's keep this idea of how are we taking the things that we're covering today, how are we taking them further into our work after the module is over, after these 2 hours are over. So today, what are we going to focus on? We're going to focus on what is good collaboration. There's many definitions, obviously, of collaboration and what is good collaboration, but the important thing is to look at what is our own definition of good collaboration, because that brings the concept alive and to a practical space. So we are going to focus on that. And we are going to use a framework called the CALM model to guide us through the process of getting our own definition of good collaboration. And when we think about collaboration, again, not from a sort of work plan or project plan perspective and from an activity to activity standpoint, but actually from a more holistic view. How do we approach collaboration from that more holistic, what we call systems perspective? So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about complexity, which is a key limiting condition in a way to collaboration, and how do we address that? And what are the components within the effective collaborative action methodology, which actually we're going to talk about the 10 key principles today. How can the 10 key principles help us navigate through that complexity? And then applying the work at our landscape level. So let's get started then. Well, we've already started actually, but we'll get started on what is good collaboration. And we're going to do a deep check-in today in pairs or groups of 3. And the invitation is to think of a time when you experienced good collaboration. Yeah, think of a concrete experience and share within your breakout groups what made it good for you and how did you feel in it. And the invitation is to try to be specific, to provide details, and this means avoid going to the, well, in general, I think good collaboration is when people get together and can work in a harmonious environment. Try to go back to that experience and be specific of, well, you know, this experience was very valuable because we got to spend 3 days all together in the same space, face to face, and it made it good that we could know each other better in the different social, you know, go to the details. And then for the ones that are listening, practice deep listening. So we call deep listening to this ability of just paying attention and being there for the other person without necessarily having to provide an answer or a response. We're going to have between 3 to 4 minutes per person, depending on whether you are in a pair, you can have 4 minutes each. If you're in a group of 3, you can have 3 minutes each. And in 9-10 minutes, we're going to be back here in the group, and we're going to do a collective sense making of what comes out from those conversations. So thank you very much, and Courtney will help us move into breakout groups. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat box as well now and for the rest of the session. so welcome back. And I hope you had a good conversation, good and more close-up, intimate conversation with someone that maybe you don't interact on a regular basis. And so in order to sense, make, and capture what happened in those conversations, and to get one of many framings and tools that we can use to understand what good collaboration looks like, I wanted to share with you this calm framework from Co-Creative. I really like it because I think it's quite simple, it's quite holistic as well, and the acronym to collaborate, stay calm helps remember it in a way. So the framework basically states that there are 4 agendas for good collaboration, for good collaborative innovation. And so the different actions, the way that we think collaboration and the things that we do and where we put attention and where we put intention should be around this 4, they call it agendas. We can call them areas of focus or areas of work. So connecting from a heart perspective, so building trust and building trusting connections across the different stakeholders. Aligning, so from a spirit perspective, having a clear and deeply purpose and shared intent that glues people together in a way beyond more superficial differences that may come up from a power dynamic, conflict, history, context, all of the kind of different things that we know surface in any multi-stakeholder collaborative process. Learning, so also appealing to the head and understanding the system and the human experience to it, the intellectual and the experiential, and then making, so going into action. Sometimes collaboration, especially from a multi-stakeholder perspective, and we hear this a lot in different countries and different projects, you know, how do we move from dialogue to action? How do we move further from the conversation, right? So taking action, building and testing tangible solutions, and doing so not only at a micro level, but bringing them at the scale that's needed. So these are the 4 agendas or the 4 areas of focus. And so I'm curious to hear how or see maybe, because we're going to capture those insights on a Google spreadsheet, on a Google slide, sorry. And Courtney, if you can please help us by sharing the link on the chat. From the conversations that you had in the check-in groups, what are the things that came up of what good collaboration was for you and for your colleagues? And where would you put those things? Would you put them in the connecting side? Would you put them in the aligning? Would you put them in the learning? Or would you put them in the making? Yeah. And let's go into the link of the Google slide. So that we can join in. Here it is. This is, sorry, Courtney, that's for the second bit. So let me just share the link. If you can click on the link that I've just shared, you will see that we have this diagram here. Let me just share my screen, might be easier and helpful. Yeah, so it's here. So this is the slide that we want you to see. And in each one of these post-it notes, virtual post-it notes, you can start collecting some of those ideas and then basically moving them. So for example, trust and respect across collaborators. Then this is just to give an example. And so trust and respect across collaborators could go into the connecting agenda. Yeah. So this is what we're going to do in a few minutes that we have, so that we can create this collective definition from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think the key point, of course, will include all of these four themes. So like first thing, of course, starting from aligning, having a common goals, and then together, yeah, can understand each other, can connect, can openly share what they can do, what they can do, what they have on their hand, what they don't have, and then from there they collaborate to make things work, to produce something, and then out of this process can learn, and then again share, okay, for replication or for scaling up, what could be made more effective or efficient.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. And maybe one more person that would like to share what's your insight in terms of what is good collaboration and how does it look like? I'm just looking at the side to carve out a little bit of space on the post-it so that everyone can see what's been written. Anyone else? One more person?
Okay, yeah, well, I think that, as Jimmy also said, I think all are very important. But I think in our group, and also if you look at what's been posted, that a very important part of it is the connection. Having as a starting point for the collaboration to be effective, there has to be a very strong connection. And in our small group, I think it was mainly people working directly with communities, which may be a bit more easier to make the connection if you have sufficient time to interact with them. But with more formal organizations like governments or companies or other partner organizations, that may be a little bit more challenging to find opportunities to build these relations, these connections outside of a formal setting.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed. So how do we make a connection part of an intrinsic part of everything that we do? And there is this trap sometimes that we fall under, which is this idea of being very transactional, very what we call technical, focus on that, and kind of neglect the connection. And we are actually working at the moment with a project at a very early stage in Costa Rica on bringing multi-stakeholders together for a national agenda on food and ag systems that's just recently been launched. And with the country team office, we were actually discussing this, how 80% of the work happens before that multi-stakeholder encounter takes place. And how it is about building those strong connections with them ourselves, but also across them, so that by the time that they arrive to that space, shared space, the bases, the foundations are there. And so it's that 20% that's left that's going to be much easier. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. I seem to hear someone else that wanted to speak, but I'm not sure. So if there was someone else that wanted to share, please feel free to jump in now. We will clean up a little bit just put the post-it in order and then share them once we are for the post session follow-up. So yeah, I'm gonna go back to the presentation now. Hopefully you can see. We're going to start getting into this idea of what gets in the way of effective collaboration and how do we measure progress. We're going to take a few minutes now and then go into a break, 5 minutes break. And then we're going to come back and apply this to our landscape work and then obviously conclude the 2 hours. And one of the things that we speak a lot, or that we use a lot, this word complexity, and how in systems change, when we want to bring change in big systems, large systems like food and ag, we tend to try to simplify the systems so that we can work with them. But oftentimes in that simplification, we end up losing the perspective that actually the simplification is not a representation of the whole system. Yeah, and we tend to do this, work plans and these ideas of, well, if I take this action, then this is going to be the consequence, and therefore this is going to be the impact. And this is what we call this linear approach, that if I do A, then B is going to happen. But in reality, so this is how things look like from a planning perspective. But in reality, we end up facing something that's much, much more different when we are out there in the world doing the work. And first of all, it is really important to acknowledge that this complexity exists so that we can work with it. If we don't recognize it, if we just stay in the framing of, if I do A, then I'm going to get B, then we're going to lose sight of what's really happening, and how do I actually influence the system in a way that actually brings impact at a micro scale, but also at a large scale. And so I thought this is a couple of slides that a colleague of ours, Charlie, uses very frequently, and I think they're very visual in translating this idea of complexity into practice. And the other imagery that helps, at least from my perspective, I think helps understand complexity in compared to simple systems or complicated systems, is this notion of clock versus clouds. So systems are more like clouds and less than clocks, although we operate under the premise that systems work like clocks. Again, predictable, controllable, bounded. If I do A, I'm going to get B. If I fix this part, then I'm going to see this change happening. And when we assume that the systems that we work in are clocks, we aim at bringing targeted solutions and solutions that scale. But when we think about systems as clouds, and we really understand that they can be unpredictable, they are hard to control, endless and evolving, and I think the weather is a great example of a complex system in that sense, then we can invite ourselves to think about our actions and how we approach, in this case, collaboration, but any other intervention, more from how can I bring actions and things that can disrupt patterns, so recurrent things, instead of trying to fix one particular piece or element of the system. And then when we think about systems transformation, is how do we take any action that we do, or how do we think about our interventions more from the perspective of how it's going to affect the whole rather than just a specific part. Yeah. And when we talk about whole, and I think the language sometimes can be a little bit overcomplicated in systems thinking, but basically we're thinking, instead of looking at a part of a clock like we would do when we fix it, we think of the whole of the weather in a way, and think, okay, how can we affect the system in terms of patterns, so the recurrent things that keep on happening over and over again. Narratives refers to this idea of how do we describe the system, how do we describe each of the stakeholders that are a part of, how do we describe reality? That's a narrative in a way. The power relationships, as we said before, who gets to sit at the table when it comes to decision making, who drafts the agenda of an encounter, who gets to say what's done and what gets done and what doesn't. Yeah. So all of this, like bigger processes and perspectives and structures, are looked into when we think of systems as clouds, Whereas when we think of systems as clocks, we focus more on the specific parts and trying to fix them rather than the whole. And so this is just an invitation to reflect as we move into our break. And we are going to share a handout for you to continue the learning and the application of this calm model, and also this idea of complexity, which is, you know, prompting questions as we normally do when thinking and planning future interventions within your landscapes. Which of the 4 calm agendas are we addressing with this interventional work? That's a good question to ask yourself. And I would love to invite, in the couple of minutes that we have left, to invite Bagita to share a bit how they've done that, how they've used the calm agenda in the recent ECA training, and also Ibu Rini can share a little bit more. And this idea of what level of systems change is this action initiative aspiring to achieve? What level? Is it, if we go back to the clouds versus clocks, is it a targeted solution? Is it a solution at scale? Is it trying to innovate in the system? Is it trying to transform the system? And how do you know that, right? And then when thinking about taking a step back, how are you balancing the 4 agendas? And how are you balancing the work across the systems change, the different levels of systems change, from clocks to clouds? Because we're not saying that you have to focus only on systems innovation and systems transformation. We know we have to work on targeted solutions as well. We know we have to fix the clock as well. But just taking a step back and thinking, are we only fixing the little parts of the clock, or are we also looking at the bigger patterns of the weather? And how is that affecting the outcomes that we want to achieve? And so we have one more minute, I think 1 or 2 more minutes before going to the break. So I would love to invite Bagita to share how you've used the calm model and what kind of tips you can give us in the practical application of it.
So maybe regarding the National Action Plan for Sustainable Palm Oil, I'll let Bu Rini to speak first, and then I'll pick up where she left. She left off, if that's okay, Bu Rini, because you've experienced it, including on the ground as well. And then I maybe can add about the workshop. Thank you.
Sounds good. Yes, please, Ibu Rini, go ahead. Can you hear us, Ibu Rini? Yes, there you are. Oh, I don't think we can hear you. Can anyone hear Ibu Rini?
Yeah, no.
No. Ah, okay. Maybe the mic is not working. Ah, Ibu Rini is assigned as interpreter. Oh, that's why we can't hear her. Courtney, do you think is there any way we could fix that? Yeah, okay, excellent. Thank you so much. We'll get Ibu Rini back from the
It seems on
interpreter.
the, just chiming in, I think we'd have to switch over into the everybody would need to go to the channel of Japanese, or the Bahasa channel, because there's no way to remove her as this at this point, unfortunately.
That's okay, no problem. So maybe we can hear, yes, thank you, Ibu Rini. We can hear from Bagita first, and then we'll go into break and hear from Ibu Rini as we come back, if that makes sense. Thank you. So Ibu Rini, I think Courtney will connect with you separately on how to get you back into the normal channel. Thank you.
Sure. So just to share in terms of the workshop, so as a context, we've used the method to try to convene the national, provincial, and also district government from several locations in order to find more effective collaboration method between all of the layers. And within each layers, there's also different agencies and different ministries that's involved. So in a way, the way we try to approach it from Tanah Air Lestari perspective with UNDP, step by step, starting from making sure that each of the layers, national, provincial, and district, first and foremost understood where they are positioning themselves and understand the system as a whole, the system being the sustainable palm oil system, and what is the positioning of the national action plan and also the regional action plan. So we did that by actually separating the discussion first. So first day is just the national government trying to figure out their position. And then the second and third day, the second day we also split between national government and the local government. Then the third day, it was a joint conversation. And what we tried to implement through the method is we do it in a phase in each day where we identify what are the vision or what are the dream, how do they understand the system itself, and what do they want the system to achieve. And then trying to narrow it down to what type of things are challenging from their perspective for that vision to be achieved. And once they've identified this type of challenges / gaps, then we ask them to also identify what are their needs to address those gaps and also what are their contribution. So, and towards the end, trying to link back, if we have all this contribution, commitment, and all these needs, what is it that we can do realistically and trial in a concrete way? And in a way, because the method helped us to dig deeper from not only organizational attachment to the system, but also individual attachment to the system. We try to separate both. It was very interesting to see how the result of day 1 and day 2, when everybody came together in day 3, there's a lot of realization that number one, they're talking about the same thing. They actually have similar vision. They're also having empathy towards each other, which they didn't realize before. And they felt that they're not alone in the journey. So I think that was the most important first step before they agree to actually think about resources, think about work plan, and think about how they can actually look at their agreed contribution and distribute it efficiently so that they can trial 1 or 2 real action on the ground. So yeah, I think the method kind of
Lagi mute.
Sorry, we can't. Yeah,
sorry.
we can't.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
So sorry. So the method helped us divulge more than normative day-to-day information. And we also try to separate the individual versus the organization contribution. So that's super helpful also. That's it from me.
Thank you.
We're in the middle of trial, so we don't know whether this is going to pan out into something, but at least during the workshop, it was great. It was a great method.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Magita. And yes, Ibu Rini, if you want to briefly just complement anything of what Magita shared, and then we're going to go into break. But I think, and maybe we can discuss this bilaterally, I remember this spreadsheet, this Excel spreadsheet where we built up the agenda, and then there was a column where the group kind of indicated for each element of the agenda what what aspect of the CALM model was being addressed. I think that could be really good to share with the rest of the landscapes as an example of how you can carve an agenda or a multi-stakeholder event, you know, using this framework in a very practical way. So thank you. Yes, over to you, Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you. Just adding a little bit, yeah, from what our practice using the ECA during the training, I think what is the most, from me, the highlight point is about the connection among the people there, because we really, well, not only touch on the surface thing, but also we going a little bit deep into what they're concerned, what are their ideas, something, trying to dig something that is not usual. I mean, business as usual. So, and I think from the process, I think Tal is very good in facilitating the process. So at the end, the connection is really there, and then we see that this is actually something that we can work with to develop in the future, to build a bigger connection and to create something, a collaboration that can create a difference. I think that's my highlights from the workshop. Solly, thank you.
Thank you, Ibu-Rini. And I love how you highlighted what Bagita shared, and also what Godwin shared before, you know, this idea of the importance of building connection. But I love that you said the thing that's there. So sometimes we assume that the connection doesn't exist, that the shared vision doesn't exist, but actually it is there. It just needs articulation. It just needs a container, a space to surface for people to realize that it's actually there, and the empathy as well. So that's to me, that's a wonderful learning. Not just assume that there's no connection, there's no shared vision, there's no empathy, but actually it might be there. We just need to allow it to surface. So thank you very much. And we're going to go into a 5-minute break. Please stay connected, and please, if we can ask you to actually reconnect on time, so that we can keep on with the flow of the session. And in 2 hours, every minute is precious. So we'll see you 14 minutes past the hour, and I'll try to put some music while we wait. So thank you very much. Continue the recording and share my screen again. And we're getting into the last part of today's session, which is we've worked on what good collaboration is and looks like for us. We've talked about complexity from a systems perspective. What does it actually mean? How does it look like? And how do we work with complexity from a good collaboration perspective, connecting the CALM model all the way through as well. And so now we're going to look into the effective collaborative action tools and frameworks that can help answer or work through, more than answer, work through these questions of how do we navigate through the complexity and direct our actions towards good collaboration. What gets in the way? And this is very important step. First step is to identify what are the concrete things that are getting in the way of effective collaboration, and how do we measure progress? How do we identify what's already happening? What's the good things that are already happening in terms of good collaboration? And how do we monitor progress over time? And this goes back to your question, Jimmy, earlier on. You know, what are the KPIs that we can identify to make sure that we are seeing or understanding progress? And for those of you who managed to see the pre-work, there's a video explaining all of the different 10 key principles of effective collaborative action. For the purposes of time, I'm not going to go through the details of it. If you haven't been able to see the video, it would be great if you can take the time to do so. It's just a 7 or 8 minutes video that walks through the 10 key principles, as you can see here, which go from understanding the system to building systems leadership capacity, covering inclusion and working with power, working through conflict, collaborative actions and investment, participatory learning, communicating effectively, gender equality, institutionalizing the new, and building a safe collective space. This is a way of organizing and structuring the different elements that make good collaboration. As you know, there are many different frameworks. There are many different ways of putting words to this complexity. This is one, and this is the one that we are offering just to have a collective language that we can use throughout these modules and in the process of applying the tools and principles. And as the slide is showing, the intention of the 10 key principles is to bring this holistic perspective on multi-stakeholder collaborative processes and identify what are the aspects, the key aspects of collaboration that we need to work on to achieve this idea of good collaboration. How do we apply the 10 key principles? If you remember from last session, we looked at key questions that can guide our action for the different building blocks and for the essential practices, which are the other components of effective collaborative action. So we've added some guiding questions, and you will receive this as part of your material on, when thinking about applying the 10 key principles, what are the kind of questions that you can think of that can prompt you to apply them to your work? And if you remember, we had 2 layers of questions, one looking at the process of multi-stakeholder collaboration, and the other one looking at what we call the facilitation and the convening. So our own individual process and our own self-awareness around what we are bringing to that design that's coming from our own experience, conscious and unconscious biases. So these questions aim at helping us prompt that thinking and apply the 10 key principles to your work. This is part of the video that we shared on pre-work, and we will share it also afterwards in the post-module email. But at the moment for today's session, we're going to focus on following this path of going from what gets in the way of good collaboration. For each one of those key 10 key principles, we have this framework called the signals of change, which helps understand what's the baseline, what's the starting point in any collaborative work, and how do we measure progress over time. And the way that we do that is we start by looking at what gets in the way of good collaboration for that specific context and work. And this is what we call limiting conditions. And for each principle, we've identified a series of limiting conditions. How can we move forward? And there are examples of tools and practices to advance in each one of the key principles. You've received this as a handout for pre-work and for pre-read. You will receive another post-session handout that has the 10 key principles and the different tools and the links to the references to these different tools. So what are the things that you can apply to work on those limiting conditions? And then how do we know that change is happening? How do we see progress? How do we notice it? And these are the signals of change, which I think are very important and relevant because they put words to that notion of identifying change in complexity, which is very difficult. When we work with clocks, we fix that little part and we see the clock working. That's our clue, our cue that we've done something right. When we work with clouds, we do things, but we don't necessarily see an immediate response, an immediate action, an immediate tangible result right away. So the signals of change are trying to bring in those elements that can help us identify that we are making progress, how we are making progress, And then finally, there's a space, obviously, to adapt this mechanism and this tool to your own context, because obviously in a complex system, if we see systems of clouds, we cannot it's impossible to map all the limiting conditions beforehand or map all the signals of change beforehand. So here we are inviting you to bring in your own understanding of limiting conditions that you see in your own work at your landscape, and the same with signals of change. What are the things that are making you notice that there's progress? And the same for inclusion and working with power. So for today's session, we are going to focus on these two principles, just for the sake of making it manageable time-wise. But the idea is actually to use this framework to build that baseline for each one of the landscapes. And so we will be in touch with each landscape team to have a specific session to go through the signals of change framework with you on a landscape team focused basis. We wanted first to have this space where you could play a little bit with the tool and get familiarized before we would go into the whole analysis for each landscape. So as part of your pre-work, you've for each landscape, you've prioritized the 10 key principles based on your understanding of your landscape needs. So we have that input, and we are going to focus today on these 2 key principles that I've shared, but for the purposes of the follow-up, we will look into the prioritization that you've already done. We are also going to share the surveys again in the post session so that we can capture more information than one we just captured for today. So now we're going to move into an interactive session in breakout groups to, again, play a little bit with how would this work in practice. And just to get a quick sense of what you've done, you've provided individual input on limiting conditions for these 2 key principles from the perspective of your landscape work. How do you see what's getting in the way of collaboration, or in the case of this principle, trusted relationships? So you've provided your input, which has been consolidated in a collective result, and this is what you're going to work on today. And Courtney has just shared actually the links to the survey results per landscape and a one-pager that will help you guide the conversation through. And Nicola, Iburini, Courtney, and myself are going to join each of the landscapes breakout groups to help you moderate that conversation. Then we've identified what else is getting in the way. Again, your own understanding of limiting conditions from an individual to collective results. And then we've looked into the signals of change. How do we know that change is already happening? And so you've ranked or actually graded the different signals of change to the extent that they are already happening or not. And you've added some ideas on what you should focus on next to make progress. Oh, okay, Meg, we'll fix that in a minute. And then, as I said, you've prioritized the 10 key principles, yeah? So what we are going to do now, we're going to take 25 minutes and go into our landscape labs and experiment with this tool. The idea is just for you to start a conversation around, well, first of all, limiting conditions and signals of change. So get some time to look into the collective results. Choose one of the key principles to start with, the build a collective safe space or inclusion and working with power. Just choose one for the sake of time. And for that chosen principle, go through the limiting conditions. So read the input individually and then have a group conversation on identifying what are the key points, and there's a one-pager Google slide where you can add your collective landscape sense making of that. Let me just share it on screen. So I want to show you, okay, these are the, you have access to all of this. Google working slides. Here it is. So for each landscape, there's a slide that you can use to collect the different insights that you gather for the principle that you chose. Yeah. Limiting condition, what gets in the way of effective collaboration and system change, your notes, what change is already happening. Yeah. What's your intention for this principle? Set one intention for your landscape team and then actions to get there. We don't need to go through all of this. Just start the conversation and see where it goes. We will continue it on a landscape level and give more details to this. As I said, today we're just giving it a go and experimenting with it. And you will have one of us joining and facilitating. So for now, Courtney is going to open the breakout groups. Join your own landscape team breakout group. And we will start with choosing one of the key principles, going through the limiting conditions, reading and having a group conversation to make sense of that. And then signals of change, the same, setting our intention and identifying 2 or 3 actions to get there. We will unpack this on the groups.
Sorry, just to chime in from a technical standpoint, the breakout groups are something you should be able to see as self-selecting for the 4 different landscapes. So please move yourself or join the landscape that you're a part of if you're not already assigned to one, if that makes sense. If you have any issues, please let us know, either unmute or just pop a note in the chat box.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you very much. So yeah, looking forward to having those breakout group conversations. Please join in your landscape breakout team. Minutes of today's session. And yeah, as mentioned at the beginning, it was just for a practice, purpose that we went through this exercise here today with one of the key principles to start getting familiarized with this idea of, what do we mean by limiting conditions? How do we observe limiting conditions on our landscape work? How do we observe signals of change? And wherever you got to in your landscape team conversation, it's okay, it's good. We are going to follow up with a specific landscape team session to go through the full analysis of the signals of change, because this is going to help you at each landscape team have built that foundation, that basis to continue documenting the change and the progress as you see it, and also to reflect on deeper on what are the limiting conditions and what are the, if you remember from last session, the leverage points, which are those points in the system, those places in the system where if you take action there, you can impact, your impact can be higher or have more ripple effects. So wherever you got is good, and we're going to unpack this more in the next session with your landscape team. I'm just gonna very briefly share the closing, and if there's anything that you would like to share in terms of the exercise or the overall session today, we are going to capture this on a quick poll, but also feel free to open your mic in the last minutes. Just to say from a closing perspective, we are going to finalize this exercise, the limiting conditions and early signals of change as mentioned. Remember to let us know if you want any kind of on-demand support or coaching individually or as a group, as a landscape team. We are here to support you, and that's part of the learning in between modules as well. Remember to book your peer group coaching session if you haven't done so yet from the April time, and we will share a Loom video soon on just to remind ourselves of what that process is. Yeah, remember to share your learnings and reflections on the digital platform. We are more and more posting all of the materials on the digital platform and trying to use email less, because we know there's a lot of emails going on. We will connect with the ambassadors separately, those of you who joined today, and yeah, share please your feedback on the post-module survey. We will send you an email and post all the materials on the digital platform as well. And yeah, for those of you who have a couple of spare minutes before jumping into another session or actually having dinner and doing your personal activities, we leave you with this Menti pulse check on what did you learn, what did you enjoy, what would you like more of, or what else. So you can just feel free to take a few minutes if you can to fill that out. And yes, I think we're good to go. Please, we have 1 minute left, but if you have anything that you would like to share out loud, please unmute yourself and go for it. Thank you. Or you can also use the chat as well.
So maybe Solly, just to confirm or clarify, in case specific per landscape session, how should we book the schedule or the session?
Yes, thank you, Jimmy. That's a great question. We will connect with you and with each landscape team lead bilaterally for that. Yeah. So we will get in touch, definitely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I think it's right on time. And yes, feel free to share your insights and inputs on this pulse check and on the post-session survey that we will share. And yeah, just get in touch with us. We can continue the conversation. 2 hours is such a short time. So apologies if you feel something was left uncovered, and just reach out. We're here to continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.